As I sit here in my living room, staring at the cracked ceiling, I can't help but wonder how I ended up with a wife as crazy as mine. From the moment I met her, I was drawn to her vivacious energy and wild spirit, but I never imagined that it would lead to this. Every day is a roller coaster with her. One minute she's laughing uncontrollably, the next she's screaming at me for something I didn't even do. I never know what to expect, and that's both exhilarating and terrifying. She's always been a free spirit, but lately, it's gotten out of control. She spends money like it's going out of style, and I'm constantly trying to rein her in. But it's like trying to tame a hurricane. I used to think that her craziness was endearing, but now it's just exhausting. I can't keep up with her, and I'm starting to feel like I'm drowning. Don't get me wrong, there are moments when she's the most amazing person in the world. She'll surprise me with a thoughtful gift or a kind gesture, and it makes me fall in love with her all over again. But those moments are becoming few and far between. I love my wife, but I don't know how much longer I can handle living with her craziness. It's like I'm constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for the next outburst or wild idea. But maybe that's just the price you pay for loving someone who's a little bit crazy. As the days went by, I started to notice that my wife's behavior was becoming more and more erratic. She would stay up late into the night, whispering to herself and pacing back and forth in the living room. At first, I thought maybe she was just stressed out or anxious, but it soon became clear that something was seriously wrong. Her eyes would glaze over, and she would mutter nonsensical phrases under her breath. I tried to talk to her about it, but she just laughed it off and told me I was being silly. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. And then, one night, it did. I woke up to the sound of my wife screaming. It was a blood-curdling scream that sent shivers down my spine. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room, where I found her crouched in the corner, her eyes wide with terror. I tried to calm her down, but she just kept screaming and pointing at the wall. And that's when I saw it, a strange symbol etched into the plaster. It looked like something out of a horror movie. I didn't know what to do, so I called the police. They arrived a few minutes later and took one look at the symbol on the wall. Their faces went white, and one of them muttered something about a cult. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with my wife, listening to her mutter and whisper to herself. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. The next morning, the police returned. They had found more symbols around the house, and they told me that they needed to take my wife in for questioning. I begged them not to, but they insisted. They put handcuffs on her and led her out of the house. As they drove away, I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. I don't know what's going to happen to my wife, or to me. All I know is that something terrible has taken hold of our lives, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to escape it. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. My wife was still in police custody, and I was left alone in our empty house. But even though she wasn't there, I could still feel her presence all around me. Every night, I would hear strange whispers coming from the walls. It sounded like someone was speaking in a language I couldn't understand. And every morning, I would find new symbols etched into the woodwork. I tried to ignore it, to pretend that everything was okay. But the fear that had settled in my chest wouldn't go away. It felt like something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, one night, it did. I was sitting in the living room, trying to read a book to distract myself from the whispers and symbols, when I heard a loud crash coming from upstairs. My heart pounding in my chest, I crept up the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The hallway was covered in symbols, and my wife was standing at the end of it, her eyes glazed over. I tried to talk to her, to bring her back to reality, but it was like she wasn't even there. And then, she started to walk towards me, her movements slow and deliberate. I turned to run, but it was like I was moving in slow motion. I could hear her footsteps getting closer and closer, and I knew that I was trapped. And then, just as I thought she was going to grab me, everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The doctors told me that I had suffered a severe head injury, but they couldn't explain how it had happened. All I knew was that my wife was still missing, and the symbols and whispers had followed me even into the hospital room. I don't know what's happening to me, or to my wife. All I know is that something evil has taken hold of our lives, and it won't let go. After my release from the hospital, I returned to our empty house, haunted by the memories of what had happened. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow in the darkness, and the whispers were louder than ever before. I started to do some research, trying to find out what could be causing these strange occurrences. I spent hours poring over ancient texts and speaking with experts in the occult, but nothing could explain what was happening to me and my wife. And then, one night, I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find a man standing on my doorstep. He was dressed in black robes and had a strange symbol etched onto his forehead. He introduced himself as a member of a secret society, one that had been tracking the cult responsible for the symbols and whispers. He told me that my wife was in grave danger, and that I was too. He offered to help me, to protect me from the evil that was stalking us. Desperate and afraid, I agreed. The man took me to a hidden underground lair, where I met with others like him. They were all dressed in black robes, and they all had the strange symbol on their foreheads. They told me that they had been watching the cult for years, trying to stop them from summoning a powerful demon that would destroy the world as we knew it. But they needed my help. They told me that the cult was planning to perform a ritual that would unleash the demon, and that they needed me to stop it. I was terrified, but I knew that I had no choice. Together with the secret society members, I infiltrated the cult's hideout. We fought our way through hordes of cultists, trying to reach the inner sanctum where the ritual was being performed. And then, we saw it, the demon. It was a towering, grotesque creature with eyes that burned like fire. It was about to be unleashed onto the world. We fought with everything we had, but it was like trying to stop a force of nature. The demon was too powerful, too overwhelming. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, my wife appeared. She was holding a strange amulet, and she used it to banish the demon back to where it came from. In the aftermath, I learned that my wife had been taken over by a powerful entity, one that had been using her to try and summon the demon. But somehow, she had managed to regain control and save us all. We left the secret society, hoping to start a new life free from the horrors that had haunted us. But even now, years later, I still hear the whispers and see the symbols in my dreams. And I know that the evil is still out there, waiting for its next chance to strike. Despite the defeat of the demon, the trauma of our ordeal lingered on. My wife and I struggled to find some sense of normalcy in our lives, haunted by the fear that the evil we had faced would one day return. We moved to a small town in the countryside, hoping that the peace and quiet would help us to heal. The locals were friendly enough, but there was something off about the place. It was like a thick fog of unease had settled over everything. Strange things started to happen soon after we arrived. We would wake up to find objects moved or broken, and we would hear strange noises in the night. We tried to ignore it, to convince ourselves that it was just our imagination, but we both knew deep down that it was something more. And then, one night, my wife disappeared. I searched for her everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. The police were no help, dismissing her disappearance as just another case of a runaway spouse. But I knew that it was something else. I started to receive strange letters in the mail, written in a language that I couldn't understand. The envelopes were always addressed to me, but there was no return address. It was like someone was watching me, playing games with my mind. The town started to feel more and more hostile. People would stare at me as I walked by, and I could hear whispers behind my back. It was like they all knew something that I didn't. And then, one night, I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find a woman standing on my doorstep. She was dressed in black robes and had the same strange symbol on her forehead that I had seen before. She told me that she was a member of a secret society, one that had been tracking the cult responsible for the strange occurrences in the town. She told me that my wife was in grave danger, and that I was too. She offered to help me, to protect me from the evil that was stalking us. Desperate and afraid, I agreed. She took me to a hidden underground lair, where I met with others like her. They told me that the cult was planning to perform a ritual that would summon a powerful demon, one that would destroy the town and everyone in it. They needed my help to stop it. They told me that I was the key to the ritual, that my wife's disappearance was part of the cult's plan. Together, we infiltrated the cult's hideout. We fought our way through hordes of cultists, trying to reach the inner sanctum where the ritual was being performed. And then, we saw it, the demon. It was a towering, grotesque creature with eyes that burned like fire. It was about to be unleashed onto the world. We fought with everything we had, but it was like trying to stop a force of nature. The demon was too powerful, too overwhelming. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, my wife appeared. She was holding a strange amulet, and she used it to banish the demon back to where it came from. In the aftermath, my wife told me what had happened to her. She had been taken by the cult, used as a sacrifice to summon the demon. But somehow, she had managed to escape and find the amulet that would banish the demon back to its realm. We left the town, hoping to start a new life free from the horrors that had haunted us. But even now, years later, I still hear the whispers and see the symbols in my dreams. And I know that the evil is still out there, waiting for its next chance to strike. Despite the defeat of the demon, the whole experience left my wife and I feeling like we had just stepped off a roller coaster ride. We had moved to a small town in the countryside hoping for peace and quiet, but we got more than we bargained for. My wife had always been a little off, but after our brush with the supernatural, she became downright loony. She would stare off into space, muttering to herself incoherently, and would often go on long rants about how the mailman was actually an alien in disguise. I tried to ignore her bizarre behavior, but it was hard not to notice when she started collecting jars of what she claimed were cursed souls in our backyard. I told her that we needed to throw them out, but she insisted that they were protecting us from evil spirits. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. One day, I woke up to find my wife standing at the foot of the bed, wearing a strange black cloak and holding a broomstick. She announced that she had joined a coven of witches and that they were going to perform a ritual to ward off the evil that was still lurking in the town. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to reason with her, telling her that we didn't need magic to solve our problems, but she wouldn't listen. She insisted that the power of the moon was our only hope. So, we went to the town square, where my wife and her coven started to perform their ritual. They were chanting and dancing around a bonfire, while I stood off to the side, feeling like a complete idiot. And then, out of nowhere, a group of town residents appeared, all dressed up in ridiculous costumes and wielding foam swords. They started to attack the coven, shouting something about a live-action role-playing game. I was caught in the middle of a surreal battle between witches and LARPers. It was like something out of a bad comedy movie. My wife was dodging foam swords left and right, trying to keep her cloak from getting dirty, while I was just trying to find a way out of the madness. In the end, the police had to be called to break up the fight. My wife was arrested for disturbing the peace, and I was left to explain to the officers that we weren't actually crazy, just caught up in a bizarre set of circumstances. We left the town soon after that, and I vowed never to let my wife anywhere near a broomstick again. Even though it was a terrifying experience, looking back on it, it's hard not to laugh at how ridiculous it all was. Despite the bizarre incident with the witches and LARPers, my wife's obsession with the occult persisted. She spent hours poring over ancient tomes and grimoires, muttering incantations and attempting to summon spirits. One night, I woke up to the sound of chanting coming from our living room. I cautiously made my way downstairs, only to find my wife surrounded by a circle of candles, a strange symbol drawn on the floor in chalk. "Are you trying to summon something again?" I asked her, half-jokingly. My wife turned to me with a wild look in her eyes. "I think I've finally found a way to bring forth a powerful demon," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This was getting out of hand. But before I could say anything, the room was filled with an eerie blue light, and a figure appeared in the center of the circle. It was a grotesque demon, with horns and scales and glowing red eyes. My wife cackled with glee, clearly delighted with her success. But as the demon started to advance towards her, I realized that this was no laughing matter. I had to think fast. I remembered a passage from one of my wife's books about how demons could be repelled by certain types of herbs. I ran to the kitchen and started rummaging through our spice rack, desperately searching for something that might work. I finally found a jar of rosemary, which I knew was supposed to have protective properties. I grabbed a handful of the fragrant herb and ran back to the living room, where my wife was still cackling maniacally. I threw the rosemary at the demon, hoping that it would do something. To my surprise, the demon recoiled, as if the herb was burning it. My wife looked at me in confusion. "What are you doing?" "Just trust me," I said, grabbing more rosemary and throwing it at the demon. The demon hissed and retreated further into the circle. My wife continued to chant, but now she seemed more hesitant, unsure of what was happening. I kept throwing the rosemary, and soon the demon was trapped in a corner of the room, snarling and growling. Finally, I grabbed a bucket of water and threw it at the demon, dousing the candles and breaking the circle. The demon vanished with a final, anguished scream. My wife looked at me, panting with excitement. "That was incredible," she exclaimed. I just shook my head. "We are never doing that again." Despite my words, my wife's obsession with the occult didn't stop. She continued to read her books, mutter incantations, and summon spirits, always looking for something more powerful. One night, I came home from work to find the house dark and silent. I called out to my wife, but there was no answer. As I made my way to the living room, I noticed that the air felt thick and heavy, as if something was weighing it down. And then I saw her. My wife was lying on the floor, her body twisted and contorted in an unnatural position. Her eyes were open, staring blankly ahead. At first, I thought she was dead. But then I heard a faint whisper, a voice that seemed to be coming from all around me. "Thank you for your sacrifice," the voice said. "Your wife's soul was the final piece I needed to complete my ritual." I turned around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing there. And then I heard another sound, a low, rumbling growl, coming from deep within the house. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake. By trying to protect my wife, I had only made things worse. I had invited something into our home, something ancient and malevolent. As I stood there, frozen in fear, the growling grew louder, and the air grew colder. And then I saw it. A shadowy figure, looming in the darkness, with eyes that seemed to glow like hot coals. I knew then that I was going to die. There was no way out. No escape. And then everything went black.